the show, Hit the Author. I'm Mike O'Brien. Today, we're joined by Dan Coonan, author of Presidential Spirits. We'll talk to him about the emotional roller coaster of getting his first novel published and the extensive research it took to make this book happen, all while heading up a collegiate athletic conference and giving back to his community. So let's say you're the President of the United States. Surely you would have a vast team of advisors, counselors, cabinet, Joint Chiefs, but what if you were able to tap into the lessons and thoughts of every former U.S. president and actually do that in person, face to face? Today we have the guy who wrote about this in his new novel. Dan, thank you for joining us here this week.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I merely just grazed the surface of your book story. So in your own words, what is Presidential Spirits all about?
Yeah, it's a modern president who's struggling a little in the midst of our polarization, who learns he can access this classic centuries-old saloon where he can interact with every former president, living or dead. And at first, he just kind of loves the camaraderie of it and is fascinated by it. But pretty soon, he starts to think, can these folks help me craft a solution to get us past just this political dysfunction and polarization that's really got a grip on the country?
I mean, you could have had your president, Danny McFadden, meet these presidents anywhere. Why a saloon?
Well, I got my creative writing teacher and novelist, Elizabeth Chrisman at Notre Dame, she said, write what you know. And I know a little bit about saloons. So I just thought, given our history, I wanted something that kind of bonded people and an atmosphere that could allow for me to write in a kind of lighthearted fashion, but also come across with some pretty serious messages. I just thought it was the perfect vehicle for me, at least. Again, I've had a little experience in those places.
Well, overall, it's a fantastic premise, but your president can talk to all 44 presidents coming for him. What was your research process in order to learn about the 44 ex-presidents and making sure you were portraying them in an accurate voice?
Right. Well, I really wanted to do justice not just to the way they spoke, but to their positions. And yeah, since I was a kid, I've read presidential biographies, and so I knew a good bit about presidents. But I researched the heck out of this, and most of the words I use for the presidents come from their speeches, their letters, other papers, their memoirs, or in some cases interviews. And so, I cite all that at the end. There's like 35 pages of sources because I want people to be able to go and look at the original context in which the president spoke those words. But I spent as much time researching this clearly as I did writing it.
Where did you go to for this type of research? I mean, I know you mentioned the Library of Congress at one point during the book, but where do you find this treasure trove of information, and how many different places did you have to go?
Well, yeah, you can see in the sources it's significant. But I mean, I start with the biographies, and so much. The beauty of writing about the presidents, so much is written about the presidents. Whatever issue you want to focus on and see what interaction presidents had with it, you can find it. There's books written about it. So whether it's what they drank, there's books written about that. Whether it's their connection with baseball, which is a piece of the book, there's books written about that. Dogs. In addition to how they felt about slavery or any of the other big weighty issues or Second Amendment, for example, that we deal with in that saloon.
I tried my best to count, but I believe all 44 at least got some sort of mention in your book.
Yeah, I wanted to, yes, not equal mention, that's for sure, but I wanted them all in there. That's, yes, I tried hard.
Well, obviously some of these presidents have longer tenures than others, but your president, Danny McFadden, may be fictional, but the issues he faces during his term are not. Much like our current president, McFadden has to contend with appointing a pair of Supreme Court justices, a mass shooting at a school, a budget shutdown. Why did you put your protagonist in front of these real-life incidents as opposed to anything else your imagination could conjure up?
Well, when I decided to craft this kind of a story, I wanted to really do justice to it. I didn't want it just to be all lighthearted. And when I decided on a theme of really country over party and trying to get us out of our polarization, I wanted this president dealing with the things that divide us the most. And so I threw in all of the things that we know of from the last decade or more of things that actually do divide us, and that the forces on either side use to divide us further for their own purposes, whether it be media folks or in some cases the parties themselves.
Well, you just said you're a big history buff, so I think there's so many different directions you could have gone with your first novel, but why this topic and why this section of history for Presidential Spirits?
I wanted to do this for 30 years or more, really, and I had, I've had a folder that I've kept of potential plot lines ever since college, and I never had time to do it. I found lately I'm sleeping less, so I committed to doing it. And a couple of friends of mine wrote a book that really inspired me to do it myself. But when I did it, I don't know how many of these I have in me. My wife, for her 50th birthday, she wanted to go to the Hall of Fame, which I love that. And so we went to the Hall of Fame, and on the way back, I was just thinking big. And I was thinking about Midnight in Paris and Field of Dreams and stories like that. And I love those kind of stories. It's a Wonderful Life, stories which have a little wrinkle to them, magical realism or whatever you want to call it, that take us out of our reality. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, and I am, why don't I go big? I mean, go big or go home. The car was asleep as I was driving home from the Hall of Fame, and it all kind of came to me, and I never had any writer's block from it. I loved the idea, the concept, and when I got home, I sat down and started writing, and went for a year and a half researching and writing. But I wanted it to be big and ambitious, and it is.
Well, it's time for a break now, but next up on the show, Hit the Author, we're going to learn more about Dan Coonan's winding path before he finally added author to his resume. It's all when we come back. Welcome back here on the show, Hit the Author. Our guest in studio this week is Dan Coonan, author of Presidential Spirits, currently available in paperback, both online and where books are sold. You can also learn more about Dan at dancoonanauthor.com. Speaking of learning about Dan Coonan, Dan, you have quite the diverse background. Your resume, your current job, by the way, as president and CEO of the Eastern College Athletic Conference. You've been involved with collegiate athletics for decades. You've been an athletic director. You were also a lawyer early in your career and even helped run a congressional campaign at one point. What compelled you to add author to that list?
It's, I think it's one of my most important lifetime goals since I was a kid, and I have been disappointed that I spent 30 years not attending to that. But I always wanted to do it. I never was sure that I could. And like I said, when a couple of people that I know, good friends of mine, did it, I thought, maybe I can. And so I started to do it, and my gosh, it all just came together. But it's one of the things that means the most to me. I would have hoped that I could pull this off, and I'm glad that I devoted the time to do it.
Who were those examples, or who are those people in your life that helped influence, kind of compelled you to become an author and write this book?
Yeah, thanks for asking. One, Paul Giannini, my sixth grade teacher, or actually he just taught us creative writing, but the way he did it, it absolutely made me want to be a writer. And I just got an email from him an hour ago thanking me for thanking him in the book or in the acknowledgments. But clearly, Mr. Giannini, then, like I said, Elizabeth Chrisman at Notre Dame, that creative writing class I took, I loved it. But again, I tabled that for 30 years. And then a friend of mine, Julie Finnegan Morris, she wrote a book, and she's a great writer. She wrote a book and a novel, Exit Strategy. And I'm like, oh my God. And I didn't even know she was writing it. And I was so impressed. And that really inspired me. And another friend of mine, Julie Clark, has written a couple books and really successful. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to try it. And so all of them together, I think, ultimately gave me the inspiration to try to give this thing a shot.
Well, again, you touched on this in our last segment, but and a year and a half that it took to write this novel. But again, not your first job. You have a lot of things going on in your life. So what was the writing process like for you?
Yeah, so I have a big job, a big, complicated, challenging job, and I wanted to do justice to that and not interfere at all, and I didn't. And so I sleep less as I get older, and so it's about 10 o'clock at night, the house gets quiet, and I would pour a cup of coffee, and I'd go for a couple hours. And if I was really on a roll, I'd go for longer than that. And I do that almost every day. And then on weekends, maybe it's 4 or 5 hours a day. And I loved it. I looked forward to that time, and it really energized me. I never had any writer's block, but that was it. And like I said, it took me a year and a half, then another year to figure out how to get it edited and where to place it. It's like separate hills you got to scale. One is to write it, one to find a good place for it, and then one to sell it. But I've loved all three of those, and I'm trying to inspire others to do it, because so many people I've talked to in this process have said, "Oh my God, I want to do that too." I'm like, I'll help you.
What was the biggest hill that you had to overcome, or the biggest obstacle that you came up against?
I think anyone, I think finding, at least for me, getting someone to pay attention to it, and whether it be agents, whether it be publishers, and that is, they get, each one of those literary agents gets 20,000 inquiries a year, and they may take a look at 100 of those of books that come their way, and the odds. I mean, so many people want to do this. That no matter what kind of writer you are, or what kind of book you've written, it can be really hard to get someone to look at it and care about it. And I think that for me perhaps was even harder, I found, than writing it.
Well, then how did you get someone to pay attention and see your work?
Well, so Goose River, I appreciate the heck out of them. For taking a shot at this. I'm sorry, it's been an emotional couple of weeks for me, but I haven't cried this much since the 1974 USC Notre Dame second half, I think, but which was a brutal time for me. But anyhow, it's just being persistent, and you get a lot of no's, and sometimes you get no, and not only is this a no, but I don't like your writing style, or, I mean, people who mean well. They're just trying to give you constructive criticism, or too wordy, or whatever. And it's a long book, by the way. But just being persistent and saying, okay, I'm putting that in the rearview mirror. It's like the next at bat. You strike out. Okay, I'm coming up into the plate next inning. I'm going to get a base hit. And that kind of mentality is what it takes to ultimately find a place for it.
What was the feeling for you and your family when you got that call that this book is going to happen?
Oh, it's great. It's great. It's when I started the project, like I said, I wasn't sure I could do it. I wasn't sure I could finish it. I wasn't sure I was going to like it when I finished it. And so every step in the process has been thrilling for me, but especially when they decided they were going to bite on it, which was really cool.
Well, we've talked a little bit about your background. You've spent many years working in college sports. You're the president and CEO of the ECAC. What drew you to this collegiate sports path, and what has kept you coming back to it?
When I was in college, it was clear to me I wanted to do something I was passionate about for my career. And my passions were sports and politics. And I thought if I go to law school, that will help me in either of those fields. And so I went to law school, got a nice offer, and practiced law for 7 years. But I thought, why don't I try to get back to what I really want to do? And I left to help run a congressional race. My candidate lost. I would have gone to D.C. with her. But then I tried to give college athletics a shot, and again tried hard to make that happen. Did some things, offered to work for almost nothing, and ultimately made a go of it, and was thrilled. It's been, I haven't looked back since I took that step. I've loved every job I've had in intercollegiate athletics. A little challenging at the moment, but we'll get through this.
Well, while you're in California working at Santa Clara University, you and your family became involved in Life Moves. Can you tell us what this organization does and why it struck a chord for your family?
Well, Santa Clara, it's such a wonderful place, and you can't help but work there or go to school there and not be caught up in this. We need to do the Jesuit thing and make the community and the world around us better. And it's a phenomenal dynamic that they have there. And so I was there for 11 years as athletic director, and it had that impact on me. And my daughter was when we started it, maybe she was in 4th grade or so, so I took her with a friend of mine, Jason, and his daughter Maddie, and we would we'd bring breakfast to a homeless shelter, women and children's shelter, and we'd make a nice breakfast for them, and it was great. It started to build a big heart in our kids, which we wanted, but it just was the right thing to do. And we're in Silicon Valley, but there's a homeless issue in Silicon Valley. You might not think that, but there is. And one thing led to another, and they put me on their board, and then made me chairman of the board, and then we merged with another large homeless shelter network, and it was a great connection for me. I really felt we could make an impact in an area where there's such a critical need. And by the way, now the need is even more so than back then, of course.
Yes, indeed. But we're going to step aside for a moment, and when we come back, we're going to delve back into the finer points of presidential spirits. You're watching the show Hit the Author. Welcome back here on the show Hit the Author. I'm Mike O'Brien. Our guest is Dan Coonan, author of Presidential Spirits, where the book's president discovers a secret saloon that is frequented by every U.S. president that came before him. Let's drill down into the story a bit here, because at points in your book, you rely on real-life members of the media to help move the narrative. An interview with Michael Smerconish, reactions from pundits such as Chris Matthews and Sean Hannity. Why did you turn to the media to help tell this story? And that's another bit of research and another voice you have to accurately echo.
Well, I think the media reflects this issue that I'm talking about, the polarization, and so I wanted the president in this book is a moderate president, and he's getting attacked by both sides, not just the politicians on both sides, but the media on both sides, and that's a big piece of our polarization. And so I wanted, in writing a book about our polarization, I needed that to be a centerpiece.
There are a couple of unique chapters in this book that show the ways the presidents of our past have been very strongly connected. And one of those focuses in on baseball. In fact, baseball pops up more than a couple times. What compelled you to make America's pastime really a major character in your book?
Well, I think, and I tried to depict it in one of the chapters where all the presidents are talking about their connection with baseball. And when you put it all together, it's amazing how much connectivity there is between presidents and baseball. But and that comes right after a discussion about race and slavery and some difficult polarizing issues. And I wanted to put things in there that really show how united we are and how really, my gosh, can't we figure the other things out, because there is so much that unites us. So I think baseball, baseball was one of the ways that I used to try to have a bond between all of them, just as a vehicle.
So much of what you presidents say in your book, as you said, are based on actual speeches, interviews, letters. There are fun and insightful anecdotes and nuggets. What were some of the favorites that you got to unearth?
Well, John Quincy Adams would go swimming naked in the Potomac every morning. I mean, just crazy stuff like that. And there's dozens and dozens of things like that. I love that, and I don't think I knew this before I started on this book, getting back to baseball. Babe Ruth's called shot in Wrigley Field. Ronald Reagan called that game on the radio, recreated it in Iowa. He used to do recreations of Chicago Cubs games over the radio in Iowa. And FDR threw out the first pitch at that game in Wrigley Field. And that there's a discussion about whether he really called a shot or not. But there were so many of those. And I tried to, I mean, I wrote it for someone like myself who loves that kind of stuff about our presidents or about history and about baseball too, by the way. And so I wanted to make it rich in moments like that.
You go with some of the obvious suspects in terms of prominence in this book: Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and so on. Were there any presidents you wish you could have included more?
Yeah, yes. I wish I could have done justice to even more of them. But it's already, early on I alluded to these discussions I had with literary agents and publishers. They wanted it shorter than it is, and to really do it and make it marketable. You don't do, it's what, 350 pages long. You make it a lot shorter than that. But I would have made it even longer if I could have done justice to some of the others. And I just had to cut somewhere. And I figured, I tried to strike a balance. I thought most people reading it who aren't like a presidential history geek like me would probably want to hear more about people like Washington. And Washington's an obvious one because I allude to his farewell address, which is the most important forgotten address in American history. And it's so, oh my gosh, it's more relevant today than even perhaps when he uttered it, especially about the dangers of parties and all. But I wish I could have made it longer. Maybe there'll be another one that I can do that for.
Well, let me ask you this, because you mentioned how Ben Franklin, unfortunately, couldn't be a part of the saloon. He's not a president. Were there any other historical characters you wish you could have inserted into that saloon somehow?
Of course. Well, Ben Franklin would have been a classic one. Alexander Hamilton, of course, he'll live in infamy on Broadway, so he doesn't need to be in the saloon. Churchill would have been classic. And I even toyed with how I could have a side room with some of the world leaders, but I had to stop myself at some point from all of that.
Well, in this book, you tackle some big subjects, as you mentioned, through the lens of all these presidents: the country's history with slavery, the current the battle for gender equality, just to name a few. How did you decide on the specific issues you wanted to address in this book?
Yeah, well, the ones I didn't want to dance around the polarizing issues, and those things. The irony is in other countries potentially meddling in our election process. We're doing a good enough job of it without their help. I mean, we are polarizing ourselves. We have people on both sides who are making a living, a fine living, dividing us. And I didn't want to dance around any of those issues. So I decided early on, I'm going to go right to the heart of it. And so I did.
How much of your political views and your potential remedies are reflected in this narrative?
I think quite a bit. It's not, this president doesn't align with me on everything, but I'm maybe a little bit more conservative on a couple issues, a little bit more progressive on a couple issues, and he's fairly moderate to make a point. But very similar. The notion of country over party is a big one for me. I really respect politicians who want to do the right thing, and even when it means bucking their own party to accomplish something that they think is in the best interest of the country.
Well, it was a wonderful read, and it's been wonderful conversing with you here today. Thanks for joining us.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you very much.
Dan Coonan has been our guest this week. The novel Presidential Spirits is available online and where books are sold. It's time to turn the page on this week's episode, but for everyone here at the show at The Author, I'm Mike O'Brien. Thanks for watching.